recorded here. Okay, so just everybody can hear me, it sounds like. You guys can see me, so we're all good there. And let me share my screen. Okay, so let me just make a few adjustments here. All right, make this bigger. No, okay. Thanks for joining today. I want to talk a little bit about what's going on in Utah, both what's happened in Utah in 2022, as well as what's going on in 2023. Now, there's only a few of us on the call, so there's no reason to wait on questions. So if you folks have questions, just unmute and ask your question. I want to talk a little bit about a few things. So the biggest thing that everyone's asking is, are we in a housing bubble? People are asking that at a national level, people are asking that at a state level. So I've got some data that I'm going to share with you that shows kind of what typically rides up to a bubble and where we are now. I want to spend some time talking about employment and job growth because that really drives home prices and the desirability of cities. I'll talk a little about a mortgage forecast, and I'll also go over prices in 2022 and 2023. So some of this data and the graphics were pulled from a Salt Lake Board of Realtors forecast breakfast. So I just want to properly attribute that. I think most of you know who I am. So I've been in real estate since 2016. I've got about 14 rental doors. I've done over 30 flips. I've sold over 100 homes. And these are my two fur babies, Margot and Max, and my husband, Tim. Okay, so let's talk about what a home price crashing bubble looks like. So there are a few factors that play into what causes a housing crash. So job cuts are a really big one, right? People can't find jobs, so they can't pay their mortgage, which leads to, I'll kind of skip around delinquency and foreclosure. Bad loans were the number one cause of our last big bubble back in 2008, 2009. Overbuilding, so people like a lot of speculative home building going on, and a high inventory. So I want to look at what things were in the last housing crisis and what they are now, because I think you'll start to see there's a very big difference in what's going on. So back in 2008, 2009, we had about 8 million job cuts. So far, we are not having any. Now, let me make sure I'm clear about that. So we are hearing about like tech companies and some larger companies laying people off. What I mean by none is I mean that the net job growth is matching those layoffs. So net, we haven't like lost a ton of jobs from the economy. Payroll jobs, which we all know is not 100% of the working class, but a lot of us, that was about 130 million back in 2008, and we're at 153 million jobs, W-2 jobs being paid out right now. So big difference there. Total jobs, so about like, it looks like about like 8 million of total jobs was additional, freelance, independent entrepreneur stuff. Right now, we're at about 158 million. So we've had a substantial increase in jobs since the last crash. We also had subprime loans, right? So anybody with a pulse could get a mortgage. Those mortgages were bad. They weren't well underwritten. We've had some legislation passed. And so what we find now is that the people that are in homes have been rigorously underwritten. They have jobs, they're making their payments. So we're not seeing this gigantic drop in any kind of, or rise in any kind of delinquency or foreclosure. And then home building. So about 2005, I would say, was the height of the home building craze. And leading up to that, the 5 years before the crash, we had about 7.65 million homes built. This time around, since I'd say, well, 5 years ago, so what was that, 2018? We've only had 4.6 million. Now, these are national numbers, obviously, right? Like this is not just Utah. I just want to give an idea of what's happening with the overall economy. One of the things that I also wanted to point out is the inventory, right? So when there's a lot of homes on the market, there's a lot of people defaulting, there's a lot of short sales, then prices go down. When you don't have loans defaulting and you have good loans and the inventory is still relatively low, you don't have gigantic drops in price, right? Because people have jobs, They're able to pay their bills. They're making their mortgage payments. So right now, nationally, we have about 1 to 1.2 million, and this is for houses, single family homes on the market right now. Our mortgage delinquency is about a third of what it was. And our homes in foreclosure is, I guess that's 8 times less, roughly. We don't see a lot of foreclosures. We aren't seeing a lot of delinquency. Of course, as we get into Utah, a lot of these numbers actually get smaller because we have even less delinquency and foreclosure in Utah than we do nationally. So let's talk a little bit about where homeowners are. So this is, I thought, was a really interesting graph. So this is showing the red line is the mortgage amount and the blue line is the equity in a property. And so you can see where this red arrow is right here, that as we started building up to the last bubble, the distance between the mortgage owed and the actual equity started to get squeezed right here. See how this starts going right down and then we start picking back up? Well, now, now what we see is that overall, and this is not like, I'm sure there's people that could be underwater somewhere in the United States. I'm not saying that, but overall, most homeowners have more equity in their home than they have previously in ratio to the debt that they owe on the property. I know for myself, that's the case. I think many of us on this call, that's the case. So there's also a big difference because why does this matter? Well, it matters because when you have people that have 3 and 4% interest rates and current interest rates are 6.5 and 7, and they have a ton of equity in their house, they're a lot less likely to move. So you hear people that previously would have said, oh, we're having another kid, we're going to get another house with another bedroom. And now they're kind of saying, hey, let's just have 2 kids in 1 room. Like there's no reason to buy a bigger house. I don't want to pay that much more in interest rate. I've already got all this equity. I don't want to spend it on something else. So you're starting to see not a slowdown, but you're seeing sellers that, how many people here sold a home in the last 5 years? I know I have. Anybody else? Yeah. So a lot of us sold homes because there was so much equity in our home and the market was so hot that homes were getting sold quickly and we could use that equity somewhere else, right? Now what we're starting to see, and I'll get into the Utah statistics, now what we're starting to see is that more sellers are staying longer. You know, typically on average, people were in their homes for about 7 years, and that trickled down to about 5, and even depending on the region, 3 years in a home before they sold. I think we're going to start seeing that tick back up because of these low interest rates. One thing that is for sure is we are not seeing 3% interest rates anytime soon. So the people that have those loans are a lot less likely to move, which is in a sense good because it constricts the inventory on the market, and constricted inventory with steady demand means that prices will rise over time. Oops. Okay, so this was really interesting. So I wanted to show, like, this is an overall correlation of the interest rate for the Fed and the mortgage rates, right? So the lower blue line is the prime rate and the red line is mortgage rates. So you can see there's a very close correlation to what's happening, except for right now. So right now we actually see quite a big difference between where the prime rate is and where the interest rate is. And many people are speculating that mortgage companies are doing that because they're anticipating that the Fed is going to raise rates again. Now, the Fed has announced that they are going to raise rates in 2023. Their language was, we're going to raise rates less aggressively. So, you know, we don't know what that means, but what we're hoping to see is that we'll get some stabilization in the mortgage rates if this goes up slower, because they've already built in a really large kind of arbitrage between those 2 points. So this is something that I think a lot of people would understand. So we have seen an expected decline in mortgage applications. So this is not refis. This is just in, you know, home purchase mortgage applications. And you can see, you know, we were steady. Here's COVID right here. And then we were steady. And then right around here, it all started sliding down. And this is exactly when the interest rates started rising. So we expected that, right? The Fed had said they're trying to slow inflation, and the biggest way they can do that is to raise the rates. And it drastically slowed down the market for the last 6 months of 2022. So we've seen a drop there, and we're starting to see a little bit of a pickup in January, but so far, like, we're still at a really low amount of people that are applying for mortgages. Now let's talk about inflation. So everyone knows inflation's been a major issue. The memes about the price of eggs are killing me right now. I think they're hilarious. There's so many out there. So apparently eggs are very expensive now. So I wanted to show kind of where we were, and this is back from like the beginning of 2020 to December of 2022. So you can see that we've been on a steady rise. Now we saw this gigantic jump, so we had COVID right here. That's when the start of it was. And then we started having all of this money that was put into the economy, right, through the Jobs Act, I think it was. So we started seeing inflation rise. Now notice like 2021, huge rise in, oh, we got somebody else trying to come in. Huge rise in inflation, also a huge rise in all of the housing prices, right? 2021 was this banner year for housing prices here in Utah. And a lot of it could have been driven by this right here. So they had cheap borrowing and a lot more money getting pumped into the economy. So it's kind of peaked up here at about 9.1% in July, and it's been slowly coming down since. The interesting thing I would say too about real estate is the market really got hit in June of this year, even though interest rates were raised months earlier. This is my opinion. My opinion of that is many people had locks on the rate. So they had rate locked. And so they had like 60 or 90 days before the rate locked. As soon as those locks started expiring, we saw this drastic decrease in demand for houses in the market. And so June is really where we started seeing the Utah market slide downwards in terms of volume. And then we'll go over pricing a little bit later. Hey, RJ, thanks for joining. Okay, so let's talk about employment and job growth. Before I go past all of this stuff, just the macro picture, any questions on anything that I've presented there? Nope, okay, right. So let's talk about job growth. So one of the biggest things that we can pay attention to understand if there's a housing bubble or not, or housing crash, I should say, coming is job growth. Now, Utah was one of the first states to reopen after the COVID lockdown. And so this is a map that shows what the job growth rate has been since reopening for COVID. Now, the states that opened much later have a much lower or even negative job growth rate because of it. But you'll notice that Utah is listed at 6.9%, second highest in the nation. The first highest is Idaho, which is only 7%. So we're right at the top of job growth. And a lot of that is because people fled, the different coasts and decided that they were going to be remote and they were going to move somewhere near the mountains. And so we saw a huge influx of people coming in 2020 and 2021, a lot of inflation in our prices, but a lot of that was also driven by they're moving here because there's jobs. And so that's something to keep in mind as we talk about where we think rates and unemployment's going to go. So I love looking at this graph. So this is the Utah unemployment graph from 2000 until 2022. So you can see like we are always, well, always, I guess like back in January here, it was above, but for the most part, we're below the national average when it comes to employment. And you'll notice now it's right around like 2 or 3% right here, which is really low. I mean, it's hard to get much lower than that when it comes to unemployment. So we've got a very strong economy and a lot of jobs being created in Utah. So like I said, even though we're seeing some layoffs on some of the bigger tech companies, the job growth that's happening and the job creation is offsetting that. And so net, we're really around the same as we were last year. So this I like looking at because it's good to see. So this is growth in Salt Lake County, right? Like most of my rentals and most of the things that I do are in Salt Lake County. Of course, I work all over Utah, but Salt Lake County really is the financial engine for the state, right? It's the biggest county. It's the highest producing county. This is the number of metro payroll jobs. So that's W-2 jobs. This is kind of what we've seen since 2000, right? We saw this, it started to go up. It kind of went down a little bit, it went up. Here's COVID. And then it's been just steadily climbing ever since then. And there's no, I'm not saying, I'm not predicting the future and I'm not giving a crystal ball prophecy here, but you can see a steady increase over time and in the recent that this most likely will not be slowing down completely, right? Like it may temper, but I don't see this going down based on the amount of jobs that are being created in Utah right now. Okay, so let's talk about mortgages. So one of the things that is critical when it comes to real estate is mortgages. And we've all found that out. Anybody that's been an investor, anybody that has been looking for a house in the last little while, the interest rate drives your ability to purchase wildly, right? So when we started at 3% interest rate in January of 2022, and we ended at close to 7% in the end of 2022, that massively changed people's buying power in terms of how much their mortgage payment could be. And it was really interesting because as I was working with buyers last year, they were looking at houses that were, say, $400,000, but at their 6% interest rate, they were paying more than people that bought similar houses for $500,000 the year before, because they had a 3% interest rate. And so a lot of people only look at the price, but really the monthly payment is the biggest thing that matters to people when they're living in the home. I'm not talking about investors, but if you're living in the home, that's the most important thing. And so we've seen this dramatic increase. So if less and less people can buy at this higher price, prices are going to go down because the prices will always meet the market. So here is some signs that we're having a decline when it comes to interest rates. So we hit just above 7% earlier this year in November. So that was a 20-year high. So I bought my home in 2002, which was 20 years ago. And when I bought my home, my interest rate was 6.25%. And I was ecstatic that I got it because most people were over 7. I say that because many of us that weren't necessarily in the market 20 years ago don't have any historical place to look back and say that's actually not that unusual. What we're seeing now is people are finally starting to understand, oh, these interest rates that we're seeing are not going away. This is not like a 1 year and everything's going to drop down to 3%. My current this is totally a humble brag. My current mortgage on my house is at 2.35%. I am never, ever moving or refinancing, right? Like it's like ridiculous how low it is. So, but many people in the last couple of years, even as people were saying, hey, these are historically low rates, now's the time to get in, it wasn't registering for them like what that meant to their buying power. One of the biggest things that I took away from this breakfast that I went to is really, if we look in like the next 10 years, the amount of growth that's supposed to happen in Utah, the people that are going to win are people that own property, because we're not creating more land and there's more people coming in. And an interesting fact is about 65% of our growth is actually internal, and only about 35% of our growth is coming from out of state. And why is that? Well, we like to have kids, right? And in maybe 20 years ago, kids had to leave the state if they wanted to go find entry-level good jobs somewhere, and then they'd come back and once they had a family, they don't have to do that anymore. So we're seeing this compounding rate of people that all want to be here, which is great. And the real winners in this situation are people that are owning property. Went the wrong way. There we go. So this is national, and this is coming from that realtor breakfast that I went to, but you can see like we had this peak in 2022 and 2022 Q4. They don't anticipate that we're going to have a gigantic drop, but they do think that rates may come down to 5.5 or 6%. It really depends on what the Fed does, and it also depends on what mortgage companies decide to do. Now, if you think about it, mortgage companies are really looking for what the market will bear when it comes to those interest rates. Because, for example, a lot of new builders are starting to reduce their prices now because they have to come down and meet the market. And so there was a subdivision in Farmington that actually came down $100,000 a unit in order to get them sold. And a lot of that is because they're national brands that just want to get out of their project and take their losses. But what we're really going to start seeing, I think, is that mortgage rates are probably going to stabilize. The biggest issue I've seen with people is they're very concerned, and I had this happen with multiple buyers in the last 4 months, where they qualified for a certain amount and then interest rates went up, and they had to requalify at a lower amount, and then interest rates went up and they had to requalify at a lower amount. And so they ended up getting a little fatigued in the market because they felt like they couldn't find anything. We'll start to see, I think, some more stability in our interest rates. Q3, Q4, there's a general consensus that that's probably when we'll start to see some good relief, but we're not getting back to 2, 3, 4% in the foreseeable future. I think that the 5 to 6 to 7 range is probably what we should be expecting. Now, something could happen, right? COVID happened. Nobody saw that coming. So I'm not saying that it's impossible for it to go back down, but given what we're seeing in the economy right now, I highly doubt that we're going to see a drop that drastic in interest rates. Before I go on to sales and prices, any questions on mortgage stuff, on the data that I presented? What can I answer for you? I'm that good. Okay. I don't really think that, but I'll take it. So let's look at some data. So this is a year over year change in median home price in Salt Lake County. And this is for all homes, right? So the single family, condo, townhomes, twin homes, a lot of the stuff that I do is strictly single family, but this is for all homes that were sold in Salt Lake County. So you'll see at the beginning of the year, we had this 26.9% year over year increase, right? Then 24, then 23, then 24, then 24, and then, oh, soon as June hit, that's when all those locks expired and we had this gigantic drop. Now, the one thing that I want to point out, though, is that it's a drop in the increase of appreciation. We still had 14% appreciation year over year at this point, right? And I think that's one of the things that people are maybe confusing a little bit. There's a big difference between a decelerating appreciation and an actual decrease or depreciation in housing prices. Now, that kind of continued throughout the year, and December was the first year in about 10 years that we've seen a decrease in year over year pricing for a specific month. And so we went down 2.1% in that month. So this is what I've been pulling. So these are single family homes in Salt Lake County. This is what I wanted to show. So this is going back to the beginning of 2021, and we started seeing this large increase. And we peaked around 636,000 of median home price in Salt Lake County for single family homes. Now that was at the end of Q2, right? Then we hit June, all those interest rates started going up and we started sliding down. And we ended the year at about 561,000 median home price for single family homes only in Salt Lake County. So we dropped about 11.7% from the peak. But this is what I want to point out, because everyone's freaking out about this right here, right? But what people aren't paying attention to is we actually are flat from last year. So maybe emotionally you feel like you got all of this money and then lost all this money, but the reality is we're slightly above where we were last year. So in the grand scheme, like it's, if you want to say it's a lost year, you can, but for many people that are just living in their homes and making their mortgage payment and we're planning on moving, none of that really was consequential, right? So our current median home price as of end of December is 561,000. Now, one of the things that I think is important, now this is going from 2021 to 2022, right? So if you look at this, or even if you just look over here, you can think, oh my gosh, the world's ending. This is crazy. I can't believe how much prices are dropping. This is the crash. This is the bubble. But then let's take a look if we go back to 2012. So that is 10 years ago, right? So what we see from 10 years ago, and I just did the median home price in Salt Lake County for single family homes every fourth quarter since 2012. And we went from 220,000 to 562,000. So in the last 10 years, we've had 255% appreciation in single family homes in Salt Lake County. So that's one of the biggest things to remember. Real estate is a long game. Real estate is not a, quarter by quarter game, right? You don't buy a house, plan on living in it for 7 years, and then look at Zillow every day to see what the price is, right? It would drive you crazy because you don't need to. And I think that's what a lot of people have been so fixated on. I've heard a lot of people talking about, hey, I'm waiting for the crash. Well, we just had a 10%, 11% decrease in home prices. That's a pretty good correction, right? So, so we've had a correction in prices, and it's directly related to interest rates because we still have low inventory. Now we have more inventory than we did earlier this year. Our days on market are longer than they were. So every week I actually do a market of the moment graphic and I post it on Facebook, and I show at different price points what the average days on market is before a house gets under contract. And for the first half of the year, it was single digits for almost every category. Things are moving so fast. Now we're up to, anywhere from 25 to 45 days, depending on the price. Some homes that are higher priced are staying on even longer. What I think many people aren't realizing is it's not normal to have single days on market. That's not sustainable. It's more normal to have a 30 to 60 days on market. That was what it was, back in 2017, 2018 when I first started. So so the last thing I want to do is really think back and show what kind of appreciation we've had since 2000, right? I bought my house in 2002, so median home price was 158. I paid 127. So so you can see from 2000 to now, we've had a 379% appreciation rate. So perspective is everything. If you're not thinking of selling in this moment, if you're planning on being in your home, then all of this volatility, and I say volatility, everybody wants to think of volatility as bad, but guess what? Volatility also means it goes up really fast. So there's been all this volatility in the market. If you're planning on staying in your home, you will benefit from that appreciation, but you don't need to worry yourself about like, oh, I could have gotten this last July, but now I'd only get this, unless you're actually trying to leave your house. And if you've had your home for 5 years, as we've shown, there's already been a gigantic increase just in the last 5 years. So even then, you still have tons of equity in your home that you might not have realized was there, right? So so that is the forecast is really this. So there isn't a housing bubble. What we're seeing is really related to interest rates. Now we're seeing positive job growth. We're seeing more people moving to Utah. We're seeing a demand for housing is still there. We see relatively low inventory, not as low as it was at the beginning of 2022, but still low. I think that mortgage rates are going to remain high. I think that we're probably going to be some stabilization in our housing prices in Q3, Q4. I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility that we may see a drop in median home price the first half of this year. I don't think we're going to see another 11%. I think that's a little pessimistic, but I think it's possible for us to go, possibly down another 5%, but nobody really knows, right? So we had normal seasonality at the end of 2022, right? Typically the real estate market is slow from Thanksgiving to the Super Bowl. And we haven't hit the Super Bowl yet. At least I don't think so. I'm not a sports guy. So, so we are poised to see what happens, right? There are a lot of people that stopped looking. Are they going to start looking again? The snow has melted here, which is also weather is always a factor in when the market starts to pick back up. So, so we will see. I think it also, like, I'm talking in median home price. Every neighborhood's going to be different. Right. So it's not, I'm not making a generalization that you can take to every single exact house, but I do think we're going to see a stabilization in it. And again, let's just remember how much appreciation we've gotten in the last 5 years, or even the last 3 years, right? Like, so like, it's really easy to get caught on bad news and focus solely on that. But the reality is this is still a great market. There's still appreciation. A lot of us have equity in our homes. So it's really just a wait and see if you are thinking about buying. The other thing is this: in 10 years, is it going to matter, right? Like, if people bought at the height of 2008, right before the crash, I guess 2007, right before the crash, they've still made a ton of money since then, just in the appreciation that we've seen in this market. And so even if you buy and you think you bought too high, in 10 years, is it really going to matter? Chances are no, because Utah doesn't have anything that looks like it's slowing down in the next 10 years. I mean, I'm not a Swami that has like a crystal ball. That's not who I am, but I'm just saying, like, knowing the economy here, we're very strong. So, so that's really what I have. I definitely want to open it up for questions. Here's my contact information if you don't have it. I also have a real estate group, just a Facebook group that I post things in, and we chat about what's going on in Utah real estate. So you're welcome to join that as well, but I'll open it up for questions.
So Alan, can I ask one a little bit off topic? Sorry
Yeah,
about
sure.
that.
Yeah, of course.
And I might not even.
Is it about the price of Bitcoin? No, just kidding.
Well, Jamie Dimon told us today that Bitcoin's a big fraud, but anyway, he's in Davos having nice wine and dinners, and we're not. Anyway. So, I mean, I'm just thinking about West Valley City, but
sure.
It's probably the same thing, because over the years we've seen, just flips, accelerating. So say you take a house that's 250 grand, and in normal inflation, it should go to 300 grand, but somebody buys it for 250, puts money into it, so value add, So it's not 300, it's 350 or it's 400.
Mhm.
So part of the price appreciation is inflation, and part of it is the value add that went in by the person doing the flip.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, more
And then,
desirable product goes for a higher price. Absolutely.
right. And so now you have a $400,000 house that you need to rent out, the buyer does. And so he needs to charge a higher rent than it
Mhm.
was going for at 250.
Right.
And so is the market, because I know you have a number of rentals, but
Right.
that's not your main business. Is the market for the rentals keeping up? Like, can the people renting keep up with the price increases related to both inflation and the value add to the flip, so that there's no kind of contraction in the, say, the gross yield of the rents or something like that?
Yeah, so I
You
would
know what
there's
I'm saying? Am I making sense or not?
Yeah, I know you're making sense. I think for me, there's a couple of things that are really playing in here. So financing, as we found with interest rates being higher, is the key to making a rental cash flow in this market right now. So it's also like if you've got a $400,000 home and you have it at 6%, that might be less possible to get the right rent for it versus if you had it at 3%, right? So it really just depends on the property. What I see when I'm talking to sellers, a lot of sellers have not yet figured out that this market has shifted. They are still believing Zillow. They still think that they're going to get this price. And what we see is those homes end up sitting on the market longer. And the longer on the market, the more concessions they end up giving, whether that's a price reduction or seller paid closing costs that they're giving to the buyers. And ultimately, it's bringing down the price. What I see a lot of people doing right now is getting seller paid closing costs and using it to buy down the rate, so that then it makes a lot more sense as a rental, right? So I am seeing a steady increase in rents, but not, I mean, 5% a year, which is still strong. So I'm not seeing, like, I've had no difficulty filling any of my units in the last year. We steadily increased the rents. So I'm not seeing that. I think that it's about that person's long-term goal, right? If they think, hey, I know that like in the next 5 years, like interest rates are going to go down slightly, and I think the market's going to go up and they're going to be speculative, they might decide that they're willing to take it and take a loss, $100 loss or $200 loss every month. That might be their choice. But I think it all comes down to how are you buying it? Are you putting a large down payment so you're borrowing less money? Because that's what's going to affect your cash flow, right? It's just the mortgage payment. So it comes down to how you're buying it. That's my opinion. But I'm not seeing a decrease in rental demand. I'm not seeing a decrease in rental prices. We've had a lot of large apartment buildings open, 200 unit apartment buildings open in Salt Lake, and they all seem to be getting full relatively quick. And they're paying premium prices on that. So I'm just not seeing that. I'm not seeing that come out in terms of people's inability to pay rent. That hasn't come up. Does that answer your question? Yep. Josh is shaking his head, so I
Yep.
feel like I made the right answer. What other questions can I answer?
Well, I think you tapped into something that I was going to ask about, and that is, do you feel that this has turned into more of a buyer's market at this point? And are you seeing sellers making more concessions? Even though housing prices may not be coming down, are people doing other things to compensate for that, higher interest rate or the market slowing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, let me just put some definition around buyer's market. So there's a couple of terms. A buyer's market typically has to do with how much inventory is on the market. And a buyer's market typically means that you've got 6 months or more of inventory. Inventory is just, if we sold houses at the rate we're selling them today, how long would it take to go through all the inventory that we have on the market today? So we were down to as little as like 3 to 4 weeks during certain parts of the last couple of years. We're up to, I think, 3 months now, right around there. So we're still technically in seller market territory, but the reality is, so that's the definition of it, right? But the reality is that I've had listings recently. All of the offers had concessions being asked for in the offer itself. Most of them were 10K or more. and sellers will take them because that's where we are right now. So what I'm seeing is like if it's priced correctly when you launch, when you list it, I'm seeing people that are like getting full price offers, but then they're asking for 10K back or, 5K back or 12K back, whatever. So what we will see is we are seeing a decline in price for that. But really what they're doing is they're not using it to pay off the house anymore. They're just buying down the rate. They're just putting all of that seller paid into their rate so that long term they have, because when you buy down a rate, you're just prepaying interest, right? Like that's all. I mean, the bank is still getting their interest. You're just prepaying it. So your monthly payment is lower. That's what I see more than anything else. The sellers that are successful in this market are willing to work with buyers. And what I've seen right now is that quality matters more and more and more because there's more houses to look at. There were times when I would put a house on the market and in 3 days I'd have like 10 offers. Last 2 weeks ago, I had a listing that went live and I was talking to one of the agents. They're like, well, we're seeing 5 houses today, so we're going to try and get to yours last. And that alone is the shift, right? Just the fact that buyers have so many options to look at. Now they can be pickier with what they're willing to accept in the condition of a house because they've got other houses to pick from. And so that feeds into why houses are on the market longer because they don't feel like they have to make an offer the moment they walk in, which this time last year they did. So that's the biggest change that I see. So I see it's definitely the sellers are more willing to work with buyers. So I wouldn't say it's a buyer's market because we don't have that much inventory, but I will say that the smart sellers and the ones that have good agents that have really educated them have let them know you need to work with your buyers on this. So yeah, that's what I see.
Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, Del, please.
Sorry, I coughed just as I.
That is okay. We can't catch it from here, so we're good.
Yeah, I know. And the time difference we have being down here, we have a bit of jet lag. Any thoughts on the difference between buyers that are going to be owner occupied versus investors, and also the buyers that are cash only versus mortgages?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we've seen a small increase in cash buyers over the last year. Of course, a lot more beginning of the year, and then it kind of started going down with everything else as we went throughout the last of the year. I think that the investors that I talk to and work with are all making sure that they're getting the margin they need. And so a lot of them haven't bought a ton because sellers haven't quite figured it out yet, or the house is not distressed enough that they're going to get it as low as what a flipper would need, or even if they're going to use it as a rental. Some investors are buying like buy and holds that are already ready turnkey. But for a lot of investors, they're still kind of waiting for the right deal because many people, myself included, got caught in you buy a house at the beginning of the year and the comps are X, but by the time you put it on the market, the comps have gone down. And so now you've either lost profit or you lost money because you can't sell the house for what you, and like all of your homework was right, but the market shifted. So people that are buying homes for themselves are much better off because they're looking at that monthly payment because they're living there. That's their home, right? So they just care about that. Whereas investors are a lot stricter about what they're going to be picking up. And so I've seen fewer wholesales going out. I've seen fewer investors. We are seeing some cash. I mean, cash buyers don't care what happens to interest rates. So some cash buyers are just taking advantage of the fact that the prices have dropped and they're jumping in the market now. But that's what I see. That's what I'm seeing right now. Yeah, it's definitely, I would say it's slanted in owner occupies favor right now, just because they just care about what the mortgage payment is. They don't have to make a profit on it. Cool. What else, guys? Josh, why are you being so shy?
I was just being polite. Hey, I got a quick question on rentals. So nationwide, there's been a softening, mostly on multifamily situations.
Yep.
I'm not seeing a whole lot of that here in Utah, but I was wondering what your take is on that.
Yeah, here's the thing. So I can think about like projects that have recently gone live. What I don't know is about all the projects that are in mid construction, because I'm not sure when they're actually going to get up there. But from what I've seen, there hasn't been a big slowdown. I'm not seeing a huge vacancy rate in multifamily
Yeah.
in Utah, in Salt Lake County, at least. So I haven't seen that, but I think it's about, I don't have the statistics on how many starts have been issued in the last 2 years for those large mega complexes. But based on the job growth and the population growth, I don't know that I'm seeing a huge, I mean, here's the thing. They're charging like $2,100 for a 2-bedroom apartment, which is nuts. Like you
Yeah.
can,
Yeah.
most, like my mortgage is only 1,700. I have a whole house. So,
Yeah.
but people are willing to pay that for now because there's really nowhere else to go. So I'm not seeing a big softening, but I mean, that's the first place we'd see it. Right. We'd
Yeah.
see it at those bigger complexes before we saw it in like single family or duplex areas, because people want to live. I mean, it's kind of a different audience for who wants to live in the mega complexes and who wants to live in single families. Because I think that like by the time there's anything drastic going on multifamily, we're still pretty insulated on the single family side. I'm not an expert on multifamily, so I don't want to act as if I know it all. But just from my own observation, I haven't seen too big of a softening here.
Yeah, I haven't either locally. I know even locally, it's changing the financing.
Yeah, yeah,
Where you'd get a syndication and you'd be planning on get your money back out in 3 to 5 years. That's probably not going to happen.
yep.
So it's
so
going to
funny.
be different.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's going to be different for the financing part,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know how many other people, but I know you've got rentals. I've
Mhm.
got rentals. I'm wondering, as I'm doing an evaluation of a property I'm going to buy, I'm highly dependent upon that cash flow, that rental
Yep.
being where it's at. If it's going to soften and back off a couple $100, that's going to change
Yep.
my cash flow quite a bit, because
Mhm.
maybe it's only 300 and it's going to cut more than 50%.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
so I was just wondering what your feel was, what you've seen so far.
Yeah, so it's funny you say that. So I'm in a syndication in my solo 401k. And I started it at the beginning of last year, and they were supposed to break ground Q4 of last year. And I just got an email from the syndication head saying that they are most likely not breaking down until mid 2023. And it was financing was specifically the problem.
Yeah.
Because financing had changed so drastically. It just, he was like, I just think we need to wait. Like, I don't think this is the right time to do it. And so, and it's exactly what you were saying, Josh, like, oh, I thought I would have my money back sooner, but nope. It's like you can't go back to the syndication and say, give them my money back. That's not how it works. Right?
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
you committed to it. You sent them the money, like it's in the project now. So,
yeah, I hope you get your money back, because
Yeah.
it's like the financing changes and it's not just a matter of, well, we're not going to make what we thought. It's like,
Yeah.
we can't make this deal work now.
Yeah. Yep.
Yep. So it's, I hope things work out with that. But
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to whoever is the general on the project, right?
Yes,
Like the person
totally.
that I'm working with has tons of experience, has done tons of successful projects, like, and I've actually invested with him in previous things and got my money back. So I am, luckily it's my 401k. So I'm like mentally able to take a little space and be like, I wouldn't touch this for 20 years. Like, I'm not going to get all crazy about it. Now, if it was my own money, I might feel differently, but I was just lucky enough that happened with one that was in my 401k. So
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And if it's exactly what you said, if your GM is educated, experienced, and that project doesn't specifically work out, they're not going to pull the trigger just to pull the trigger.
Right. Yep.
They're going to make wise financial decisions, and it all comes down to the people you're working with. I totally agree.
100%.
Cool. Well, that's what I was looking for. I have seen softening of pricing. Even Zillow. I was looking at Zillow.
Wow.
And Zillow's got a drop in it, and it's actually helping me in one of the deals I'm looking at, because I can refer to it to the person I'm talking to. Yes. Like,
wow.
Go look at Zillow, So there are some good things coming out of it that way, but yeah, it's all speculative on how long this downturn's going to be, if it's going to level out, how long is it going to stay down, all that kind of stuff. So I really appreciate you bringing in all the graphs and the numbers together. It's really good to
Yeah,
look
of
at
course.
both the macro and the micro. So I
Mhm.
really appreciate it.
Yeah, one of the things I'm really excited about as we move through this year and maybe into next year, nobody really knows what's going to happen. However, I do anticipate that there will be more seller financing deals
Oh, absolutely.
coming on the market. And it's funny right now, it's so skewed because when you look on the MLS and you choose like seller finance deals, they're basically all rentals that didn't sell. And they're like charging this crazy interest rate, like put $100,000 down, it's 10% interest. It's like, that's not a
Yeah.
seller finance deal. 2-year
Yeah.
balloon, it's like, oh no, you're just trying to get out of a project. So what I'd like to see, I mean, I've got a couple of seller finance deals myself, and I'd like to see that kind of come around, right? Like that's where having cash in the bank, having some money that you can, like put towards it and pick up rentals that way. I think it's the best thing because most of them are going to have a very low interest rate, right? So if you get a loan that's only 5 years old and they're willing to do it for the length of loan and you're at 3.5%, it's like you're set. I mean, that's where your cash flow goes way up because you're not paying as much in your mortgage.
I totally agree. I'm actually putting together an offer for a homeowner that wants to do a seller finance. I just have to make the numbers work. And it's basically, if I can get in for 10% or less, I'm getting a mortgage at 2.75 and a second at 4.25. Even the second's better than what I can get right now. So I'm like, hey, if I can get in at even 10%, I don't want to do 10%, but even if it was at 10%, I'm buying these great interest rates. So seller financing is going to be huge. Yeah.
Agreed.
Totally. Cool. Thanks, man. That's all
Absolutely.
I had.
Cool. RJ, how about you? Any questions I can answer for you? He's not really at his computer. He's off doing something else, just getting credit for being on the call. Well, anyone else? Does anyone else have any questions that I can answer before I'll let y'all go? Well, thank you so much for joining. I am still a realtor, even though I talk about crypto a lot. I'm still a realtor. So if you guys know anyone that's looking for a home or help with real estate in Utah, I'm happy to help them out. In the next year, you're going to see a big dropout in realtors, and the realtors that are going to be sticking around are realtors that have been around for a while. So, pick your realtor wisely. That's all I have. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Alan.
Very much.
Take care. See ya.
Thank you.